My name is Rowan Reynolds, and today I'd like to record 3 poems and a short story. I'll give some background to each one. My first poem concerns Victory in Europe Day, VE Day, which took place on the 8th of May 1945. I was supposed to be in England during the VE Day 80th commemorations this year. It didn't work out, and I suppose I was disappointed, homesick, and missing my parents, who frequently talked about the war years. I was saddened at blank looks I received from people here who didn't even know what VE Day was and had no idea what it represents. After all, it cost 140,000 plus American lives just in Europe, 407,000 plus lost in all theatres of World War II. My parents were war generation. Mum often talked about her experiences in the Blitz, also her time in France just after the war when my father, who was a doctor, was helping with the injured coming in from all parts of Europe. One of her brighter memories was VE Day, when, with my then 5-month-old brother in her arms, Mum was in the crowds outside Buckingham Palace. This is how she described it. There was the royal family on the balcony with Winston Churchill, and then he peed on me. She meant my brother, not the great man, Mr. Churchill. So on the 8th of May 2025, I put both the US and the Union Jack flags out, watched some London commentations on TV, then received photos of what my family and friends were doing at their own local events. I so wanted to be there. With all those thoughts going on in my head, I came up with the following poem about the past, the present, and the future. VE Day. The King salutes his mother's generation, cenotaph draped in flags, the military march and bands play. The people commemorate. The royals are on the balcony. The crowds applaud. Red arrows leave trails of colour over grey skies of London. 80 years ago, in generations past, the same sights in black and white were seen. Another king and queen, with future queen, stood up there. So grateful for peace, waving to the crowds. "This is your hour," said the man of the hour. And in that crowd, my mother with my brother joined in to sing and dance and cheer. It was a lovely day, and so many cried for joy, but others did not. So many were lost. Those brave men in blue, Spitfire, Lancaster and Blenheim. Never was so much owed by so many to so few. 20,000 airmen remembered at Runnymede, Dad's young cousin amongst them, along with so many others lost in youth, innocents in the Blitz, buried in fallen debris, never surrender, and they didn't. That brave generation all but gone, centenarians have tea with royals. What do they think of us today? Those that lived and fought and loved, when time was short and action critical? Do they wonder what it was all for, in today's world of division and confusion, failing alliances, dictators and tyranny? Are they not taken back to 1930s appeasement? Peace in our time that never came to pass, their lives defined by those years, hero, saint, victim, the same, forever changed, made or broken, praying that we can be worthy of them and remember. My next poem is from my own life. When I was a teenager, I spent every Easter holiday in Tenby, West Wales, where my sister lives. I'd go there with my friend Jules, and we'd have such a laugh, wandering around the coastal paths in town. Later, I became friends with Stephanie, who was raised in Tenby. We remained close for over 20 years until she passed away. We had a memorial bench built overlooking Tenby Harbour with her name inscribed. Earlier this year, completely out of the blue, Stephanie's brother contacted me. He told me that his other sister died last year and he wanted to add her name to the bench. Anyway, it got me thinking about those two friends and my teenage years spent happily in Tenby over Easter. Incidentally, last month I was able to meet Stephanie's brother and see the updated bench in Tenby. Easter in Tenby. It was always so, Easters by the sea, crashing waves on weathered rocks, sea and sand in spring, the harbour filled with boats, and the Blue Fisherman's Church where it all began, our walks through muddy paths, woodlands filled with moss, crocus, primrose and daffodil. We were always lost. Hot cross buns and chocolate eggs, picnics on the beach, such laughter and such fun, and your bench, placed for lovely views, always remembered and always visited. I can think of you as I look out to sea. You loved it here, and this is how we met. St Mary's Church in Tenby Town, a homemade tomb by W.I., closed and covered in flowers. Then Sunday comes, an open tomb. He is not here, he is risen, promising one day we'll all meet again. and we'll walk again those paths of youth and laugh at such silly things in Tenby Town at Easter. My third and last poem was inspired from a recent visit back to England when I went to look at the exterior of my childhood home. My parents were always welcoming family and friends into our house. In addition, my dad, a doctor, had his consultation rooms upstairs with appointments on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. So there were always people coming in and out. We had a large garden, now built on, but when I was growing up it was a great place to play hide and seek with friends. Lots of trees and bushes. I thought about my first 19 years spent in 118 Thornhill Road and came up with a poem called The Black and White House. The Black and White House. The black and white house remains resolute and strong. Your walls kept me safe and warm. Your doors welcomed family and friends, waifs and strays, and patients looking for a cure. The black and white house was a refuge from the storm. When sadness and tragedy came, brother, grandma and cousin, you wept with us and we were comforted and made it through the days of mourning with you. The black and white house saw happy times. You laughed with us in all our gatherings, parties, celebrations and do's, homecomings, dinners and so much fun. You were a popular place. The black and white house had gardens filled with scent, roses, lawns and terraces, trees to climb and places to hide, the shrubbery filled with bushes and my den. The black and white house is no longer my home. I'm a stranger from far away as I look at you. I feel the memories flood into my heart and a yearning for those times long past. I'm ending this recording with a short story I wrote over 30 years ago. It's called The Family Photograph and is based on a true experience of the challenges my then husband and I had trying to get his family together for a professional photograph. The Family Photograph. In Britain, the family photograph is not as popular as in the States. Few families have professional photographs taken regularly. Yet when this event does occur, it makes for a real family occasion and becomes an opportunity for parents, children, grandchildren and even great-grandchildren to come together and enjoy each other's company. So when my in-laws suggested that we might have a family photograph taken by a professional photographer, I imagined an enjoyable day with the family. This was my first experience of a family photograph. My father had always taken the view that such photographs were vulgar and far too depressing to look at years later, when, he said, one is old and ugly. It was all my mother could do to persuade him to have a professional photographer at their own wedding. It was arranged that the portrait should take place just after Christmas, when the family would all be together. The family consisted of my husband's parents, his 2 younger brothers, 2 sisters and ourselves. It was early on the scheduled day, and it became quite obvious that the sitting would be impossible. For during the night, my father had complained of chest pain. By morning, having called the doctor, he was diagnosed as having a coronary and was immediately taken by ambulance to the intensive care unit of the local hospital. I spoke with the photographer, who was already waiting our arrival at my in-laws' home. It really isn't convenient, I explained, as my father waved, "Cheerio, chaps," and disappeared into the ambulance. A few days later, my father was still in hospital, but somewhat improved. So the 8 of us gathered for the portrait again. It was New Year's Eve and desperately cold. On this occasion, we all went to the young photographer's studio, which was shared with a florist. I was dressed in a blue summer dress, and it is clear from the photographs how cold I must have been, because my lips are the same shade as my dress. The photographic session passed smoothly, except for one small incident involving my husband's little sister, who was then 9. In her navy blue velvet dress, perched on a high stool, she obediently exercised all her facial muscles as directed by the photographer. At one point, she was asked to move just a little forward and lost her balance. She fell from her stool, bypassing a row of poinsettias and landing heavily on the concrete floor, disturbing some withered pampas grasses that stuck to her velvet dress with a leech-like intensity. The smiles left her little face and tears came. My mother-in-law comforted the child as the next sibling very gingerly took her place on the high stool for her individual photograph. In these cramped conditions, with the strong smell of plant life and the bitter cold, there was ice on the windows, it was decided that the group photograph was not going to work. We were too many for the pocket-sized studio, So another venue was suggested on the other side of the city. It was not until the following Easter that the family was able to regroup, and then gathering was by far the most difficult. My husband and I arrived in good time at the family home, dressed and ready. I had taken precautions against the cold and wore a thick suit. On arrival, only my father-in-law was there. He sat in his working clothes, deeply concerned that he had lost his ruler. One 13-year-old son appeared half-clad, with shirt in hand. He commenced to iron this garment on the floor, then to his horror burnt a hole in the shirt that went straight through to the carpet. In his shock, he dropped the iron that landed on his toe. Shrieking and yelling, he danced about the room as the iron made a further burn to the carpet. Both my husband and his father seemed unconcerned by what was going on around them and continued to look for the ruler. I began to chase after my brother-in-law, trying to find out how badly he had been burnt. The chase continued until I fell over the corner of a hamster cage that had been put out for cleaning. The young boy soon decided that his mother's wrath was going to be far more severe than a burnt toe, so he looked for ways to cover up the 2 carpet burns. This resulted in the hamster having his accommodation suddenly relocated without warning to the middle of the floor. Where the rest of the family might be remained a mystery. Now, with less than an hour to go until our appointment, with only 2 members of the family ready, I began to feel somewhat agitated. A little later, my mother-in-law arrived with her 2 daughters. They were still in casual clothes. No one knew where the other son was. Apparently he'd been out all night. After several phone calls were made, the 17-year-old boy sheepishly appeared, rather tired-looking. Then, as if suddenly realizing why we had all come together, rushed upstairs. He could be seen running about the house in his boxer shorts, yelling after his mother, demanding to know where his chino jeans might be. He wore a watch on each wrist. This, he said, was the fashion. My father-in-law remained in his armchair and continued to appear oblivious as to what was going on. His mother appeared from the kitchen, having spent the morning baking cakes for the large household. The petite 70-year-old matriarch, seeing our dilemma, raised her voice to her son. "Come on, Tom, move yourself. You're having your picture taken. Get changed and hurry along." "I haven't anything to wear," he replied, and turning to his wife, he said, "She's taken all my clothes." My mother-in-law was, by this time, sitting at the window in tears, muttering incoherently. She was menopausal, and the slightest agitation made her cry. This was turning out to be more than the average day, and she had reached her limits. Eventually, my father-in-law raised himself from his armchair and slowly disappeared upstairs to return dressed in different clothes. He was wearing a slightly paint-stained cardigan, of that colour type that always looks dirty even when new. But this garment was not new. He refused to wear a suit, and it was all his mother could do to get a tie round his neck. It was not long before most of us felt like replacing his tie with a noose. Finally we were ready, and the matriarch waved us off as we all bundled into 2 cars like a group of day trippers heading for the seaside. The one brother was still fastening up his trousers and trying to comb his hair as his mother ignored stop signs and ran red lights. My husband and I sighed with relief. We were on our way at last. However, at a busy junction, my mother-in-law took one street and we took another. It was some time before we found each other again, and by then we wondered who was the idiot who had the idea of a family photograph in the first place. We were now parked in a very rough area of the city, and we were about to make it appear even rougher by having a violent argument in the street. The address we had been given turned out to be some abandoned warehouse of grey concrete, not at all the sophisticated studio we had expected. We climbed up 4 flights of stairs, which, by the smell, suggested there were no toilets in the building, let alone a working lift. The walls were covered with obscene graffiti. My mother-in-law blushed as her youngest child asked what one of the 4-lettered painted words meant. Along a narrow corridor we came to a small door with a temporary sign giving the photographer's name written by hand. We nervously tapped on the door, expecting to be attacked at any moment. We heard 2 separate padlocks being released to make our entrance possible. A 6-foot-tall black man in a scarlet tracksuit, looking as if he had just flown in from the Olympic Games, opened the door and showed us into an adjoining room to wait. We all glared at each other. The 17-year-old son took the brunt of everybody's annoyance. Where had he been all night? What had he been doing? Did he not know how to use a phone? The boy was spared trying to give excuses as we were shortly taken into the studio itself. The subject of his twilight activities was superseded by a collage on the wall facing us. The collage was made up of countless life-size nudes in full colour. I suspected family portraits were merely a sideline in our photographer's work. My mother-in-law blushed again as her younger sons gazed at the wall mesmerised. Eventually, having been ignored twice by them, she yelled, "If you have to fantasize, kindly do it in the bedroom or the bathroom, and not while we're all looking on." The makeshift studio was as basic as it could be. A sheet acting as a background was held by rusty nails to the plastered ceiling. As we arrived, the photographer was laying a second tarpaulin-like sheet over a dirty-looking metal chair and beer crate. A further box was also being shoved under this sheet. "Welcome, welcome," exclaimed the photographer. "No more heart attacks, I trust." His comment was ignored. Our sense of humour was about gone. Under his direction, we took our places on the tarpaulin. I caught my tights on a nail, and a run went the length of my leg. My young sister-in-law, eager to reach her place quickly, yet again lost her balance. As she fell, she reached out, grabbing at the background sheet that, with some ceiling plaster, immediately joined her in her plunge. The written graffiti seen during our climb up the stairs was verbalised by the photographer and continued to be as he and his colleague tried in vain to resurrect the sheet. Finally, the black sportsman clambered up a ladder and physically held the sheet in place. His thumbs could be seen in some of the photographs. A total of 12 photographs were taken, our smiles visibly waning as each one was shot. For a number of years, the family photograph hung on the wall in the lounge of my in-laws' home as a permanent reminder of that stressful day. We never did purchase a portrait for our own home. Then, during one visit, we noticed it had been replaced by a much nicer photograph. The oldest son had recently graduated from university, and he had a real smile on his face. "Where's the family photo, then?" my husband asked. His mother looked a little uncomfortable. "Your sister was helping me clean. She was perched on a chair and leant over to dust the photograph, and she tripped." "What again?" my husband exclaimed, remembering her other 2 falls that had both resulted in chaos. "Well, she didn't trip, really. She just lost her balance. Then she sort of went into a dive. She tried to reach out for the wall to steady herself, but instead ripped the photograph right off its hook. The problem was your father was asleep in his armchair below her, which was just as well, as he broke her fall." "Was Dad all right?" "Oh, no need to worry about him. Your father has a very thick skull, haven't you, Tom?" But Tom was asleep again in his armchair. We wondered if he was still suffering from the unexpected crash landing of his daughter. "And what of the photograph?" She winced again. "Well, the frame survived, but the photograph wasn't as solid as your dad's head." The years have passed by, and apart from graduation and weddings, no other professional photographers have ever been called upon for their services by our family.